Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Can you hear me? Just give me a sign that you can hear me. Okay, my name is Francesco Pignatelli, and I'm leading the Digital Government Research Team at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to introduce today this event, where almost 200 participants registered despite the summer holidays period still ongoing. Actually, I just returned yesterday from my vacation, and this is the best way to be back to work again. Today's webinar, in fact, will give us an overview of the results of the important work conducted in the area of digital government transformation by the JRC. With our partner DGs, both Digit and Connect, in the last 2 years, but also we set the stage for the new research and policy support we have defined for the future. Our unit, the digital economy, is addressing its research on understanding the social, technical, economic impact of the digital transformation and the implication of the economy and society, and ultimately the citizen. We are also in particular focusing on how data-driven governance is changing the way public service delivery are designed and how policy can embrace digital innovation in a complex world. Within this context, as part of the ELISE action of the ISA Square program, we launched in 2018 a new research on exploring digital government transformation in the EU, understanding public sector innovation in a data-driven society, in short, DIGIGOV. And the aim was to investigate more in depth the interplay between digital technology and other factors transforming government operations, and to pave the way to in-depth analysis of the effect that can be generated by digital innovation in public sector organization and how to assess their social and economic impact. So the research has produced many interesting findings and the final report, summarizing the entire research outcomes and a policy brief that are also being published and will be available soon. Thus, I would like to thank the research consortium composed by PPMI, Open Evidence, Politecnico di Milano, around Europe, and Martel Innovate for the extraordinary work done, as well as Gianluca for orchestrating the research as scientific and project leader for the JRC. In addition, an important result of DIGIGOV has been the establishment of a community of experts and practitioners that has contributed to the validation of the research activities and will continue also after the end of this research. This also helped us restructuring our own research agenda. In fact, the digital project has been instrumental in the last 2 years to accompany also our internal policy reorientation and the preparation for our future work program 21-22, that in fact is now centered on digital transformation of governance and public sector innovation. Indeed, the result of DIGIGOV research that will be presented later by Gianluca resonate very well with the need for governments to urgently change their modus operandi to address the challenges that the rapid pace of the digital transformation of society is raising, especially now in light of COVID-19 pandemic, and at the moment in which the government action plan is coming to an end and the new policy on digital government and revised interoperability strategy are being designed as part of the Digital Europe program. So Natalia Aristimuñoz Perez from Digit and Ramos from Connect will definitely tell us more about this during the high-level panel discussion that will follow the webinar, and that will debate on how to shape digital government transformation in the future, 2030-2040. To get inspired to travel into the future, I give now the floor to Gianluca, who will present the DIGIGOV result, including the future scenarios developed as part of the research project, and who will then moderate the panel discussion, where we will have the pleasure to have with us also Vincenzo Acquario, from Division of Public Institution Digital Government of the United Nations, and also Barbara Ubaldi of OECD, who I'm sure don't need any presentation. Thanks, and I give you the floor, Gianluca.
Grazie, Francesco. Thanks to everyone to be here today. So we are very pleased to add such an interest despite still the holiday period. I mean, I personally wanted to share with you the recent results, actually anticipated results of what we will publish soon in our final report, and will present in some events in September. So in fact, as Francesco mentioned, we will do in the next 20-25 minutes an excursion into the future up to 2040 actually. But before to do that, I saw already, I'm very pleased there are some former colleagues that have joined, including my first head of unit at JRC, because I think we have to learn also from the past. And so I will also do a bit of an excursion into the future we envisioned 10 years ago, before, of course, going then to the current, let's say, policy debate and see what are implications for future policy and research. So as I said, and this is not new for JRC, and who has been working with JRC in the last 20 years at least, because we've been focusing on foresight and future-oriented technology analysis since the beginning. And now this is recognized at the highest level of policy making, because the von der Leyen Commission has a vice presidency under Vice President Shevkovich that focus specifically on foresight. But we do this, of course, under the leadership also of Maria Gabriel, the Commissioner for Research, Innovation and Education. And in fact, these are very interconnected topics also of interest to public sector and innovation in the public sector. So, and some of you may already seen this slide that we developed 10 years ago, exactly in Seville, when we made some scenario building for Digital Europe, the Horizon 2030, and we were assuming that society will let's say society will change either to be more open or less open, and the integration of technology will make policy making more or less intelligent. And this was because there was some signals of change or even paradigmatic shift that we have seen since the first decade of 2000 with the emergence of social media and Facebook, of course. I remember with Dave Roster that we made this kind of anticipation of who was coming as Person of the Year in Time magazine every year. And then we saw, in fact, the Twitter revolution, or so-called Twitter revolution in the Arab Spring in 2011. And then 2012, the first day in office, Obama signed the OpenGov bill that actually made this becoming more or less the new normal. So it's just a matter of changing our behavior and our society. Well, after a few years, we see that we're still at the let's say at the middle of this battle. And after that, we had Angela Merkel, Trump, and others that are not necessarily representing, let's say, openness in technological terms. Although then in the recent past, we have seen, although it was not real, but actually the Person of the Year Time magazine could have been a blockchain, or definitely artificial intelligence, as last year it became the most important keyword talked in every conference and policy circle. We also did, actually, colleagues in Brussels of the JRC Policy Lab, EU Policy Lab, I also contributed to another scenario building exercise that resonate very much with the crossroad one I mentioned before, building on the fact that either tech giant or autocratic government could take the lead, or we could have a kind of do-it-yourself democracy or a regulatocracy system. Now, the question is still open, so the jury is still there to decide what actually is the potential impact of ICT-enabled innovation to transform governance and policy making. And that's why in 2018, when I joined the Digital Economy Unit, we actually went back to think about the future, knowing well that prediction is a very difficult thing to do, especially if it is about the future, as Niels Bohr was used to say. Now, the DIGIGOV project, let's say, built on a decade at least of declaration on e-government, from the first Malmo action plan, ministerial declaration on open and trusted government, and then through the various ministerial events that brought to the Tallinn Declaration on user-centric e-government, and then in the recent conferences, in Vienna, Helsinki, the focus on human-centric digital government, somehow linking to the AI discourse on human-centric artificial intelligence. And now, of course, with the emergence of the new pandemic society, the new digital strategies has clearly showed how it is crucial for AI adoption to be embedded into government and public sector innovation. Now, the objectives of the project, I won't go too much into detail, of course, want to go more in depth in the interplay between digital technology and the other factors that are actually transforming government operation and policy making in a data-driven society, because it would be naive to think that technology, after 20 years of looking at this topic, would be per se the transforming agent, the change agent in governance. And the outcome was to gain a better understanding of the expected outcome was also to see how new approaches to use data for policy design service delivery could actually help policymakers to address better the systemic problems that actually the current outbreak of the COVID also showed in its entirety and complexity. And that's why also the actionable research and policy recommendations that we designed are in line with the new policy direction of the Commission for the years to come. So as it was mentioned by Francesco, we have been supported in this activity by a consortium that made an excellent work from led by PPMI and composed by various members from Open Evidence, Politecnico Milano, and Europe, and Martel. And we actually did our own work first to make a systematization of the knowledge base, the very rich knowledge base that we have in this field. That is not a new field, but we try to look at it exactly from the multidimensional aspect of digital government and public sector innovation. And we conducted a systematic literature review, but also an analysis of the policy and the practice in the field, and developed a conceptual framework and that has been tested against real life case studies and experiments. I'll be back briefly on that. But very important, we also engaged the community, as it was mentioned before, both practitioners, stakeholders, representative, and experts that were very instrumental in finalizing the framework and the conceptual and the policy and research recommendations. So as I said, we have found after this analysis of a decade of literature in the field in different areas, not only from an ICT perspective, that there is still a limited, quite limited, robust empirical evidence on what are the effects of digital government transformation, especially when it comes not to the usual productivity gains or efficiency and effectiveness, but rather on what is less measurable, like inclusion, legitimacy, and participation. So the more soft political issues that are becoming more and more important for restoring also the trust between the citizens and the policymakers. And in this respect, we also try to unveil what is the path to digital government. That is not necessarily a revolution all the time. It goes from simple to more complex forms of governing, and has different stages of readiness and maturity that not necessarily go in a linear mode, but actually integrate the feedback loops. And that's why we need to consider also and embrace actually the complexity of the governance and service delivery transformation. And going beyond the techno-optimism that has often characterized the literature in the field, creating sometimes some utopian or dystopian configuration of digital innovation. The other, and this is published in a report that actually has been released in 2019, that has been coupled by another report that we published recently in May, that present more in details the conceptual framework that we have developed, as well as the case studies and experiment that are there to illustrate what could be the possible impacts of the digital transformation in different contexts and phases of the policy cycle. These that we call it in the DIGIGOV F, the DIGIGOV framework, is not, of course, a theoretical framework, but it aims to contribute to systematizing and reconceptualizing the phenomenon of digital government transformation within public sector innovation, and help understand better and pave the way for more in-depth assessment that could be then operationalized into more practical toolkits. Now here, I won't go into details, but basically there are two important elements that we need to consider. One, we started from what are called in literature the innovation antecedents, and how this could affect from external and from internal perspective the change strategies, and the digital government that has change strategies within governments, and the need to reframe public sector innovation. That means reconsidering, rethinking the cognitive routine and behaviors that are intrinsic in the governance in the public sector. We started with the first framework that has been then discussed with experts and then generated a more complex, let's say, framework that looks at the embrace the complexity theories approach, and developed also a typology of digital innovation based on the reach and the depth of digital government strategies and innovation in the public sector. So I won't go much into details, we have also in the webinar Professor Colagnone that supported me as a scientific coordinator of the consortium. So maybe in the discussion session, if possible, we can also go deeper into these, or the results of the case studies that actually has been also a pioneer, I would say, in this area, because it's not usual to have experimental or quasi-experimental approaches to case studies in this field. So we selected 4 cases that we then analyzed in depth, and the report I mentioned before include all the details of the results. And one was the Tvarkau Vilnius platform for citizen engagement in Vilnius, that shows that, of course, by providing the platform per se is not sufficient, of course, to generate participation, and this requires an integration of the civil society and the NGOs. In this case, that was definitely a key driver of success. We also looked at the body-worn cameras phenomenon in both UK, but also in US and in other countries in Europe through secondary review of literature. And basically here we also saw that clearly this technology has an enormous potential, but at the same time is still not conclusive, the evidence on the let's say, the positive effect in terms of legitimacy and trust increase in the police in this case. We also looked at the case in the area of education and sustainable mobility, that bit, let's say, not necessarily at the core of the e-government, the traditional government, through a pilot project developed by the Fondazione Bruno Kessler and tested in Trento and Ferrara, where we saw also that in this case, through gamification, that there is an increase of the inclusion and also the literacy in terms of changing the also behavior for mobility, sustainable mobility, of also reinforcing the tie between the children, the parents, and the school actors. And finally, we have conducted an online experiment in Germany and Spain with 1,400 participants in an online user panel, where we hypothesized we designed 4 hypothetical cases of new digital services in the area of health, data protection, transport, and also we show that here the level of trust is different in different areas, but also most important is not necessarily the public sector, let's say the trustee or the most trustee, as often in some cases citizens prefer a third party or let's say an independent body to gather their personal data, especially in some sensitive areas. As I say, the very important part of the research was the engagement with experts and stakeholders. This was done in 2 large workshops in Ispra and in Seville, where we also used the policy lab approach to actually engage the participants. And this is also published in a report that was released last week. So just to conclude this part, we want to summarize in three point the lessons learned and how to define the framework conditions for innovating governance models and have new design for policy. Clearly, on one side, we need to enable the technological conditions for that openness and sharing, but also we have to manage what I mean, since many years we call the governance rhythm of ICT, so that we can really unleash this institutional redesign. And this, of course, with the opportunity that data power intelligence system allows today for better evidence-based policy making. Now, getting to the future again, as part of the prospective part of the research, we of course looked more specifically into the AI predictive and cognitive technologies that are now at the center of our digital transformation of society. So I won't go too much into details. I'm sure you are all aware of some of the policy work and the research we are also contributing to. But clearly there is from I would say from the industry and from some research, a kind of techno-deterministic dream that super AI will realize a singularity at a certain point, or actually very soon. But we're not actually sure that expectations are coupled with the social political trends we witness every day, and especially now within the aftermath of within the core of the COVID emergency crisis. Clearly, there are two main dimensions of concern that emerge that are not new also, but are now actually stressed maybe to a different dimension. The role of the state vis-a-vis the market, so who actually will govern, if possible, the digital transformation, and what is the level of the individual data protection. Clearly, this is a debate that is very hot. As I said, we had an online, due to COVID, Foresight workshop that was quite interesting, and with over 50 participants, and we managed to really have an interactive discussion. And we presented some extreme thought-provoking scenarios, from a government-led to a market-led, or a more dystopian surveillance or utopian governance. And clearly there was a discussion that allowed us to generate insight that we then use to finalize, refine and finalize the scenarios. So the scenarios that we will present in our final report, so this is a kind of a premiere because it's the first time we are presenting in public, will resonate according to two main dimensions of impact. On one side, we look at the digital transformation landscape that goes from a more regulated interventionist approach to a more unregulated, laissez-faire, if you want, a perspective, where actually the regulatory framework here is not only the legal aspect, but actually also the capacity of the public sector and the government to steer the digital transformation, so enable a genuine multi-partnership development and innovation environment that could then develop some human-centric services. On the other side, we have the, as it is a tradition in Foresight, to oppose a more, let's say, governmental access to a societal one. Look at the digital citizenry, that goes from passive to active, so where the citizens are in control of their own data, and there is what is now the hot topic also on the debate of digital sovereignty fully realized in Europe. At least we are looking this from the European perspective. But clearly, we have to remember that scenario is a possible world, a world that does not have to be yet come to pass, as the future says, because basically here we have to acknowledge that probably definitely none of the four scenarios we've realized per se, although we have clearly a kind of more, let's say, preferred one. And in fact, among the four scenarios, apart from the more surveillance control system of state that resonate with the Leviathan governance that we envisioned 10 years ago, we have, due to the COVID in particular today, an approach more on precautionary principles that could benefit inclusion, perhaps, or maybe limit the innovation. On the other side, and if the status quo continues, we have apathic citizens that could lead to more closed innovation, where the digital capacity of citizens is limited. Or in the more ideal governance scenario, trust and open innovation take the lead, and these could be done by linking actually the innovators, so the makers, and the shapers that are the citizens. And citizens here will be digitally active, but also empowered to manage their own data. And at the same time, the governments will be capable exactly of steering that governance framework needed to facilitate, stimulate innovation and facilitate development of human-centric digital services. So coming to the conclusion part, and we have tried, although of course clearly the empirical part, the conceptual empirical part of the research was already completed when the COVID emergency arrived. Some of these implications are still valid today, of course, and more so. So we have followed, as one of our experts taught us, the rule of 7, that for the Chinese culture is a lucky number. So we have 7 main findings and 7 policy recommendations. So on one side, we have acknowledge through the case studies that there are limits of automation, especially in the realm of artificial intelligence, and of the immediate productivity gains that actually may not be so positive, especially if they are not followed by investments that allow to keep the service up and running in the medium to long term. So beyond the piloting and the quick wins that requires the reframing, as we mentioned in our conceptual framework, of the organizational processes and the institutional design. We also saw through our case studies and experiment that there is a strategic importance and of legitimacy and trust, but also this has a twofold nature that could be, of course, positive, but also allegedly negative, and create the risk that that point to the fact that we definitely need to focus more on adoption and user needs, so to avoid increasing the shrinking digital divides. Also, we have to be realistic about the potential of technology to engage people and have open governance and co-production. Although at the same time, there is a crucial aspect in terms of the effects that are linked to public value. And as I said several times, also to embrace the complexity of the public sector. So in terms of implications for policymakers, we also identified the need to govern this tension between, on one side, the platformization of government that is theorized by many since several years now, and the distributed network system that current technology actually could enable. This would also require enforcing what the French School of Regulation called the mode of regulation that could enable the potential of e-government 4.0. But to address the risks that are also inherent in this process, we need to develop, and there is a debate currently, especially in Europe, on ethical frameworks to minimize the risk of new technology, while at the same time opening access to data, protecting privacy, and of course promoting interoperability. Let's remember that this study is actually started between conducted within the context of the ICTs program. So it is important that, especially in the new DigiGOV program, the interoperability of government strategy will take into consideration some of these findings. And then, of course, we need to consider the need of capacity building in the public sector, and creating a new digital transformation culture that allows to prioritize public value and align governance systems with the sustainable development goals. And I'm sure that in the panel discussion we will touch upon this. That is a very important topic to discuss, not only, let's say, at the UN level, I would say, but actually in Europe, especially now in light of the COVID crisis. So to conclude, in terms of future research, because of course as a researcher we are very much interested in what comes next in terms of further investigation, it would be need to apply further the conceptual framework to empirical cases, so that we can better understand what is the innovation, public sector innovation potential of practices, and then promote not only the scaling up of pilots, but also scaling that deep and out, so the transferability of these innovative public services, for instance. And also look at data spaces, innovative public services, and GovTech to stimulate adoption of innovation public services, and especially with regard to new emerging technologies, potentially disruptive, like AI, blockchain, for instance. And also we should study the collateral potential positive effects of COVID-19 that, according to some, have been boosting the speed up of and the needed reframing for digital government transformation. This links also to the fact that we should focus more on the public value creation, not only at the national level, but also at local and regional public administration systems, and assessing the impact of specific technologies, also linking, of course, to the other activities that I'm sure many of you are aware we are conducting as part of the AI Watch, for instance, or the Innovative Public Service Observatory, in collaboration with our partner DGs, especially DigiConnect and Digit, that are also here represented today in the panel discussion, and they were clearly instrumental in giving us guidance for linking and bridging the science with policy. That is what we have tried to do in this, especially in the last part of the research. And so to conclude, what is next is, as I said, the final report is now being printed and will be available mid-September, and we are also preparing a policy brief and recommendations that would then allow us to depart at full speed for the future. So thank you for the attention, and of course, if there's any question, and especially the difficult one, there will be also my colleague Cristiano that can answer. I would suggest, as I think we have still 15 minutes to gather maybe a couple of questions and comments. I don't know if they are already in the chat. And then, of course, we could move to the high-level panel discussion that is scheduled at 15:45. So, and of course, thank you. And if you are interested in, there are some. I think Simon, you did something wrong. Anyway, so there are also the contact person. Okay, so here are some of the questions. So, okay. Yeah, maybe we can have the people presenting make their questions. I don't know how many. I cannot manage here now the screen anymore. So if they want to intervene live, we will be very happy. As this is not, let's say, a traditional webinar, as everybody has the same right to speak and intervene. So Simon, can you allow the speakers, the people that want to intervene?
They are allowed, yes.
So I know Jana or Martin, maybe they want to start. I see.
Yes, hello, Gianluca. This is Jana. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. So my question is related to your what's next in terms of research. And as you mentioned that that individual member states are at different starting points when digitalizing and transforming the government or their respective governments. And at the moment we are measuring because we are at the capable or empowered in terms of action by data-proven methods. So for us, as public servants and in public service, it's important to have metrics. So currently we are using the DESI index, yes, in the public sector digitalization. However, I would like to understand whether there is a, and that's benchmark against the average, yes? Mm-hmm. And is there any chance to, in order to show leadership, to include European Commission as a form of administration or an organization and its transformation, digital transformation, and include in the ranking, and as well set the ideal model or these or model an ideal curve of the digital transformation of governments, given that they are digitally non-native organizations. So I think that would be very helpful in terms of digital transformation and data models and actions for us.
Okay, thanks, Jana. Well, I'm not sure I'm in a position to answer your question. We have also colleagues. So that's why I'm calling for support from both either colleagues from the policy DG, because it's a very interesting question, but also maybe Cristiano want to get in because it's a very well-known expert in measurement and evaluation of e-government and digital government. Because I think here it's a more political question that is, of course, important to consider not just the member states, rather the EU as a whole. And I think this resonates well with the approach that in the AI that you are very familiar, linked to the coordinated action plan. So
yes.
That would be, of course, personally, I would be much in favor of having this, and I've been probably theorizing this for many years, of the fact that we should have a common, let's say, European public administration, let's say, approach. But of course, then there are other, let's say, other issues that come to the fore. So.
Well, I'm not saying that we should have one joint public administration, EU public administration approach. I'm saying that perhaps it's a way to measure against as an alternative to the current benchmark of the EU average. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know if someone wants to intervene on these. Otherwise, maybe we can go to another question. I know that there is
Francesca Frederick had a question.
Okay.
Hi, Gianluca. Hello, everyone. So I just am interested about the governance systems and alignment with the SDGs. And so my question is about how do you think this is connected with practical actions that include like schools and students, which for me are the future global citizens of 2040? Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks. This is a very important question. I would say that, in fact, one of our cases is not by accident focusing on the education. And also there is quite some important work that even the JRC has been doing on looking at the digitalization of schools and digital education in general. I've also been involved in the past. But I think going to the SDGs, what is interesting is that there are some SDGs where there is no specific reference to ICT, to technology, but they are very much actually potentially enabled by technology. If you look at SDG 16, that looks at the institutional, let's say, reforms and democratic. Saying is not written democratic, of course, but is a look at the idea to link the reform of good governance to democratic development. Actually, technology can play an important role there, and this cannot be, of course, disconnected by education or other topics. So, but this again is I would say it's a political question, because then, of course, if you look at the new strategy, digital strategy of the Commission, it is very much linking also the technological and digital transformation with the Green Deal, and this is also very important in the current situation. So, thanks. So, I don't know if there's any other comment or questions also.
I think it's one by Edwin Wiese.
Yes. Well, my question was a bit concrete one. I saw the report gave an overview of the state of the art for different themes for the different member states, and I wondered which of the developments can have impact on not only the digital government of the member states, but on cooperation as well. Recently, in the COVID crisis, we've seen that different member states develop their own apps and successful apps. And well, to me, the question arises, what technology would specifically benefit from cooperation there?
Yeah, and I think this resonates also with another question that I see very pleased from Jeremy Millert, but also look at the game changes potential of COVID on society. So I think this is something that, as I said, and I mean, is one of the possible future direction of the research is also to consider more in depth if it is true that that the COVID emergency as let's say is accelerating the digital transformation, and if it's doing this for the good or for the bad, and clearly some examples of possible cooperation cross-border, that is again one of the important focus of the ISA Square program, and the work we support is could be say further strengthened. And I think this is clear in the orientations of the Digital Euro program, where it is called for strengthening the interoperability focus, not only from a technical perspective, because clearly technology, this is not new, that can be semantically or I mean become interoperable, and data can be exchanged according to protocols, but it is more a governance issue. So I think this relies very much on the policy making sphere of the governance transformation. So I think we are getting to the maybe we have a very final comment question. I don't know if someone wants to intervene. Also, I mean, as many of you are probably aware of, this research, as was mentioned by Francesco, is this project is ending here today, but there will be new research starting soon, and that will focus very much on some of the concrete aspects that have emerged also from this, and more specifically on sandboxing of data spaces, and also looking at the local and regional level. So we will perhaps discuss this also later with colleagues of Digit and Connect that are also, of course, leading on these areas. So,
Gianluca.
Yes. Cristiano, yeah, please.
Cristiano, yeah, because you mentioned me in the case of the most difficult question, but there were not questions that were related very directly to the report. But on the first one on measurement, I agree that it's more of a political decision, because there are plenty of different benchmarking, and in our research we didn't find a sort of convergence among scholars on how to measure digital transformation with respect to artificial intelligence. Just one comment in reply to Jeremy's comment about the COVID, and also Edwin. There is an interesting report by the GRC. Well, first author is Kralja. There are many other authors, also Francesco, I think. And they say that the COVID is a game changer, but it increases the potentiality, positive, but also the concern. And for instance, in terms of what happened in the past months, you could see that scientists had a common platform to share data, but cities and regions did not. And obviously the kind of interoperability and geospatial intelligence and solution are those technologies that would be most useful for the cooperation. But for this cooperation to take place, there is always something above or before, which is the political decision to make things interoperable. I mean, that's a few comments I can add to some of the questions.
Okay, thanks, Cristiano. So there was a comment from Dave. Of course, I cannot but agree with Dave with the fact that we need to focus much on trust. I don't know if you want to say something. I'm also pleased that there are many participants, not only from Europe, but from all the continents, from Brazil, India, Argentina, and so forth. So I don't know if, I mean, we have 111 participants at the moment, so that is quite good, all connected. I would not ask for voting on if having a break or moving directly to the panel discussion. But as I know that Vincenzo will have to leave 4:30 sharp, I would probably suggest that we move to the panel discussion, and then of course you can keep commenting, sending us questions and critiques as well. Very much accepted and appreciated, and also getting then the discussion, maybe opening again the floor to this. We'll have a first round for the 4 participants and the 4 panelists that I ask to please put maybe their video on. So I see Barbara, and meanwhile I'll prepare for the, oops. Yeah, so Vincenzo, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So I'm putting your slide on because, okay, first of all, let me just introduce, although it was already done by Francesco, and I'm sure nobody of the panelists need to be introduced, but we have Vincenzo Acquero, that is the Chief of Digital Government of the United Nations DESA, Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and is the guru of the e-government survey. We will give us a few insights from the recent survey released a month ago, with some focus on Europe. And then Natalia Aristimuño Perez, that is the head of the interoperability unit of DIGIT, and she will give us also some insights, I guess, on the future. They're not so far in the future, but maybe just in the near future. And Andrea Almos from DG Connect, and ciao Andrea, that also has been say instrumental to many of the development in the e-government field in the past, and now looking more at the local regional level. And Barbara Ubaldi, that is leading the digital government. Well, actually now it's changed, but it's digital government open data team, or now a bit changed, of the OECD. She will tell us a bit more. Okay, so maybe I share my screen again and give to Vincenzo the floor for, I would say, 5 to 7 minutes.
Yeah. Thank you, Gianluca. While you are sharing the slides, yes, perfect. So also as Chief of Digital Government Branch of United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, it is really my great honor and privilege to be here today. And I take this opportunity to congratulate with the organizers for this very interesting and inspiring webinar, in particular with the European Commission and with the JRC. My personal and professional acknowledgement goes also to Gianluca for his excellent job done leading the research project, and to the research consortium. Distinguished colleagues and experts, ladies and gentlemen, in my few minutes, 6 minutes, I will present in a nutshell the global and regional mega trends based on the last finding of the 2020 government survey, to set up the scene for the panel discussion. I will also introduce some insights from the report to illustrate how digital government has been playing a central role, not only in responding to the COVID-19 crisis, but also for recovery and development. Next slide, please. The survey highlights a persistent positive global trend towards higher level of e-government development. At a glance, the 2020 survey reflects further improvement in global trends in the e-government development, and the transitioning of many countries from lower to higher GDI levels. In this edition, 57 countries worldwide have a very high GDI in comparison with the 40 countries in 2018. A total of 69 countries have high GDI, and 59 countries have middle GDI. So 65% of United Nations member states are now in the high and very high GDI groups. This denotes a significant improvement in the level of e-government development around the world. In total, 42 countries recorded positive upward movement from a lower GDI group to a higher one, with only 8 countries still in the lower GDI group. Next slide, please. The global average GDI continued to rise, reaching 0.6 in 2020 in comparison with 0.55 in 2018. All regions have improved their average GDI since 2018, contributing to an increase to digital development worldwide. It is worthy to notice that Africa and Oceania made notable progress, having increased their AGDI by 14%. For this first time, Asia is the second region in the world in terms of regional GDI, followed by Americas, Oceania, and Africa. But despite the significant progress made, still Oceania and Africa have their regional GDI average much below the global average. As you can see, Europe remains the leader in the e-government development with an average AGDI of 0.82, very high. All countries in Europe have AGDI values above the global average. Next slide, please. This table shows that the 14 countries in the highest rating class, that is VH, of the very high AGDI group. So this is the group of the leading countries in the world. 5 of these 14 top rating countries in the world are from the European Commission Union, and a total of 8 are from Europe. Then we have United States continue to play a leading role in government development in Americas and globally. And the Republic of Korea is the global leader in online services provision and is the most advanced performer in Asia, with Singapore and Japan. Australia and New Zealand are the front runner of Oceania. None of the countries in Africa are included in the group of the highest rating class. Next slide, please. As a region, Europe has the most homogeneous e-government development. It has also the highest average AGDI, as we saw in the previous slides. Of the 43 European countries assessed, this is the way UN group countries. 33 are in the very high AGDI group. And this slide and the next one is about this 33. Denmark has the highest AGDI value globally for the second consecutive survey. Estonia recorded the most significant AGDI increase, and Finland improved in all 3 sub-indices in the AGDI. Both Sweden and the United Kingdom achieved a higher overall AGDI through substantial improvement in technical infrastructure component. Netherlands, Ireland, and Norway showed improvement in all 3 AGDI sub-indices. And Czech Republic, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Latvia, Croatia, Hungary, and Romania moved from high to very high AGDIs. Next slide. Participation is a key dimension of governance and one of the pillars of 2030 agenda. As for the other edition of the survey, participation was assessed and ranked, and the results are presented in Chapter 5 and in the annexes of the report. At regional level, Europe as a whole is the leading region also for e-participation, followed by Asia, Americas, Oceania, and Africa. So really, Europe has a strong legacy in terms of also digital cooperation and in terms of promoting digital transformation, not only in the region, but also worldwide. Last 2 slides. Based on the survey, 2/3 of the UN member states have already reached a high level of e-government development, and those countries have heavily relied on digital technologies in their COVID-19 pandemic response. Based on survey findings, during the crisis, many countries focused on providing information related to general health precautions and emergency numbers, supported by public announcement on national portals. As the crisis intensified, countries began extending their responses using more social media channels to report on COVID-19 statistics. At a later stage in the crisis, more governments started using dedicated COVID-19 portals to centralize the information. Many of them moved further and, in partnership with private sector, have implemented new services and apps helping in the fight against COVID-19. Next slide. To summarize, COVID-19 has forced the government and societies to turn toward digital technologies and to stress a multi-stakeholder partnership. to respond to the emergencies in the short term, to mitigate the socioeconomic repercussions in the mid-term, and to mobilize new resources and adopt new regulation, policies, and recovery tools in the long term. But the developing countries cannot afford the crisis and the recovery alone, and more initiatives to strengthen international, regional, national, and multi-stakeholder cooperation need to be put in place to restarting their fragile economies and to rebuilding their societies. The COVID-19 part is covered in details in the addendum of the report. Conclusion. To conclude, a few info about the other parts of the survey not covered by this presentation. E-government development is a rising priority in a political agenda, also at the local level and for municipalities. As part of the 2020 survey process, e-government development were assessed also for 100 cities. This part is covered in Chapter 4. And with the growing technological capacity to process even larger and more complex data sets, the potential to a more data-centric and data-driven e-government is presented in Chapter 6. This chapter introduces also the concept of data governance and stresses governments to adopt an holistic, all-of-government approach in development and overarching data governance framework. Many countries in the world still lack the capacity to leverage digital technology. Developing capacity for e-government become essential as digital government transformation involves far more than the integration of technologies in governance. A holistic framework with empirical pillars for building capacity in digital transformation are presented in Chapter 7 in the survey. So for more, this is the last one. For a more in-depth analysis, I invite all of you to download our report from UNDESA portal or to access to our eGov knowledge base. And I thank you for your attention. I think I was in time. Thank you, Gianluca.
Thank you, Vincenzo. And yeah, I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, but I will first get to and also I think this is a bit of a premiere of presenting the focus of the results on Europe. That is actually what we discussed at the Foresight workshop in July. That was exactly the day before the launch of your survey. So I will now pass to Natalia, that I'm sure can link to this and give us a lot of insight from her privileged viewpoint.
Thank you, Gianluca, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting panel and really challenging discussion that this brings. I won't go through the whole report that Gianluca you just presented. I wanted just to say that this, as you have said, has been very thoroughly done. And I would like to highlight again the importance of taking into account the different angles that you have taken into account for this report, but not only to look at the possible solutions or the possible future, but also to have the different angles to look at the problems. And I think this is really important, and we can see that in the output of the report. It confirms indeed that the digitalization or digitization of the public services is more than just technology. And this, well, I think that we that are around the table today know about that, but this has been really confirmed, and now we really see the value and the importance of looking at the organizational, how business processes are organized in the public services, also the governance of setting up all these processes, but also very important, and this is having an increased focus lately, is the legal aspects. I can say with COVID, for example, we have seen on sometimes how we were we were stopped about evolving with, for example, a solution because some legal aspects didn't allow us to move forward. And this is why we are looking at all these aspects from an interoperability and helping the digitalization of public services to have this global view to look at all the aspects, and that we don't introduce new barriers when we are looking only from one angle when developing new public services. What I would like also to highlight is in the content of this report, the importance of putting together not only research or desk reading and looking or doing surveys, but really putting that in practice. And for that also, that's part of what we are doing in the ICE Square program, where we try to combine the outputs of studies, but also to put them in practice by implementing solutions or running pilots that will help to learn how to do it for the future. So this, I think it's very important to really combine these views so that we can really support the journey of the digital public services. I would say that also something that is important, and okay, is not really answering the question that was put in the chat on the more involvement of citizens or so, but I think that now the multidisciplinarity that we are seeing together in running this kind of reports, but also in implementing solutions and services, this is really key. And here we have seen that Gianluca and the team, they have put together not also academics, practitioners, researchers, but also people working in the institutions, in the public services themselves. And this is what really brings value to what we are doing. And I think this is a real example on how we are changing. And even if the digital aspects may be a driver, it is also on the mindset and how we work together. And I think that this is a very positive first step, a step to have even more inclusiveness when delivering the public services, but since the beginning, since the design, or as we are seeing here in the reports that we are doing. The results of this study, as it was mentioned, it won't be just a study and then we close and we forget about it. There are some ideas for the future, and we will for sure take them on board. So we have seen that we started some work on innovative public services, looking at how indeed this is being done across Europe. And from the insights of this report, we will continue that work. Legal interoperability, as I mentioned, is really key in the transformation, but also the organizational interoperability. And all these will be included in the future Data Europe program that, well, if everything goes right in the adoption phase, we'll start beginning of next year. But I wanted to also mention something where I also would invite everybody to contribute, is that we just started the revision of the European Interoperability Framework. As you may have noticed on the way I was talking, with this framework that covers all these aspects, so technical, semantic, but also organizational and legal, will be revised. We are supposed to provide the new version and the evaluation by end of next year. So we will go with public consultation and collaborative approach. So I also would invite everybody to contribute to this revision. And in any case, this report will be one of the inputs for that. Also, just to highlight perhaps this part on organizational structures and governance that has been really put forward in the report. This is something that was already recognized in the interoperability framework, but we need to perhaps reinforce it and work a bit more on that, but also the innovation. And here I would like to mention that indeed, For some time, we were more looking at transformation of public service or changes, just to put it there, but we kind of underestimate the power of innovation. And this is something that has been highlighted, that we have seen now. And this is something that most probably we will have to add also in our framework. Also to see that these are things that have to be taken into account since the beginning. Another thing that also Gianluca mentioned, but I think is really also important to highlight, is the importance of public values. And as it was said, so the technologies are there, they are evolving very fast, and we have to make sure that when we are adopting from a public sector perspective these new technologies, we have in mind the public values, and we are not only looking at, for example, the usual efficiency gains that we look always when we are transforming our public administrations, but that we go beyond looking at accountability, transparency, but not only, as it was put on the table, is on having really citizen-centric or even citizen-driven services, and also include them and have this collaborative approach for the design of policies that will increase the inclusion and trust in the public services. And finally, just to also leave some time for questions, I would like to thank Gianluca for his dedication and the collaboration with the team. He has been really pushing, and I really thank him for his approach on being very inclusive in all the ideas that were put on the table. Thank you very much, and ready to discuss further on this topic. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Natalia, also for your kind words. And well, I think there are already many issues that both brought to the table of Andrea, both from the local and also the digital innovation part, including some questions. So maybe if you want to also give us your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I indeed have worked in the area of e-government, and most recently working at the local level, smart mobility, smart living, smart cities. And I'm very pleased that the local aspect has made it very significantly to the study. And indeed, two of the case studies are very much focusing on the local level. Because I think cities have an interesting role in when we're looking at the digital transformation of public sector. First of all, not only because many of us, and also in the future by 2040, many of us will live in cities, but indeed the public services, or most of the public services are delivered at local level. So it's really the first encounter with public sector, with the first encounter with public services for most of the citizens, and therefore in a way determine the image that public sector and government itself creates with vis-a-vis the citizens, and a major role player also in the creation of trust and legitimacy. It's also important for cities because of their structure, because of their size, that they actually allow for experimentation, and these kind of digital tools that you've mentioned and you've looked into require, of course, a lot of piloting and experimentation. And we see that many of the cities actually serve as a really good innovation hubs to test these essentially new digital solutions. And thirdly, I think what was just mentioned by Natalia, indeed, cities, and particular smart cities, which you could find many different definitions for, what we see is that it's moved away from the focus on efficiency, even resource efficiency in the smart city context, and really looks at how digital tools, digital solutions can actually create a better quality of life, can create the public value that you talked about, can create the sustainability, both in terms of economic prosperity, but also in terms of environmental and climate perspectives for just a better quality of life for citizens. So I think it's a very good use case to also show how the digital transformation is much broader than just the efficiency gains. I also, when I looked at the date, of course, 2040, and thinking of smart cities, many of us would start fantasizing about flying cars or drones delivering food or underground farms and so on. But one thing is for sure, and it comes across very much from the study, is that this is there's no turning back. So digitization is certainly there and it's going to stay. The COVID pandemic and its aftermath has demonstrated that it's accelerating. And also, as Cristiano said, it also brings, however, forward a number of risks, and perhaps even showcasing how we need to be more aware of these risks. And I would like to point out that this is very, very much appreciated in the study, that it brings forward very realistically this notion that we need to see that in an accelerated phase of digital transformation, how we ensure that those kind of values, those kind of principles that we've put forward, in particular in Europe, remain to be adhered to. And in particular in the local context, many of you may know that local government representative stakeholders of smart cities have put together a declaration more recently calling for a European way of the digital transformation of cities and communities. And many of these principles that have been brought forward earlier are echoed there, such as a citizen-centric approach, an ethical approach to AI, a city-driven digital transformation, and so on. So I'd like to conclude on what exactly we are focusing on in terms of local administrations, digital transformation, smart cities at a European level. And I have 3 points to make, not 7, but I hope that's gonna just make it even more crisp. So the first element is focusing on helping to implement interoperable urban platforms. And this was already pointed out earlier. Indeed, in a local context, it's even more important that citizens have a very much integrated kind of perception of the services they're given. And this can be allowed by helping to integrate different platforms focusing on different parts of the administration. You mentioned the discussion between platformization or network government, and certainly the siloed approach would have these checks and balances. But what we do see, however, is that for many smart city solutions and not only on the government side, but also on utility company side, an integrated approach can be very much facilitated by these kind of interoperable urban platforms, and we're hoping to support their implementation through the forthcoming Digital Europe program. The second element we're looking into is, of course, data and how to ensure. We've been talking about, of course, helping to interconnect and get access to data between governments. No, we've been talking about the once only principle. We've been also talking a lot about opening up some public sector data in order to facilitate innovation or increase transparency. And what we're also seeing is that there's a great advantage in particularly sharing some of the data that may not be public for everyone, may not be just for the public administrations, but could be very helpful for cities to actually manage their utilities, their waste, their traffic, but essentially they're in public hands because of the structure of cities. And so we're looking at the creation of so-called European data spaces. You may have heard of under the data strategy in Europe. And one of them will focus on the Green Deal data space to help the digital infrastructure for environment. And within that, we're looking at what it would mean for local level. How could we have a local ecosystem of data for local digital services that are not confined to one city only, but could benefit from the interconnection of these data spaces. And the third element is really on the application side, and here I refer to, for example, AI-driven applications, and as you say, for example, the predictive analytical capabilities. And what we're looking into is the notion of digital twins. That is a very interesting application area for cities, for some parts of cities, for some maybe domains in a city that could allow using the data that's been collected at local level through sensors, citizens, and so on, to actually create some scenarios like you've done here, and to be able to play with that and inform the decisions of public sector. So I think there's a lot of relevance for us. We really appreciate the in-depth of the study, the scenarios, and the findings. And just to congratulate again the study team, we find there's lots of food for thought for the local level. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I think this also brings very nicely to Barbara, because of course some of these issues that we've been discussing, I'd say in Europe, are very much also of concern at the international level. So, and the OECD has always been also pioneering. I remember from the government imperative report in 2003 and many others interesting publications. And so Barbara can give us also a flavor of the important work she's been leading. Last year, report on data-driven public sector that we refer to amply in our report, but also the recent our data analysis. I think there are very, very interesting issues, and maybe also going beyond the border of Europe. So
thank you, Gianluca. Thank you very much. And hi, everyone. And I also would like, not in a rhetoric way, but in a sincerely meant way, like my colleagues, to thank you, Gianluca and JRC, for having enabled us to be part of this conversation, because this is the study, and today's webinar is just the end of a conversation and a long engagement we had in the past few years. And I want to thank you in particular as well. We've been knowing each other for quite some time, working together on these themes for quite some time, and I'm sure that this will continue because we have them close to our heart. And in my comments, I actually would like to build on a number of comments that have been made by the colleagues, starting by the COVID-19 pandemic situation and what this has meant and what this is meaning still for governments when it comes to the use of digital technologies and data. I personally disagree strongly, and I think my team does as well, because whenever I speak about the work we do, it's not just Barbara, it's the whole team behind Barbara as well. We've tried to take away our position from discussing about the COVID-19 having pushed for an acceleration. We don't think that the COVID-19 has pushed for any acceleration. The COVID-19 has unveiled the need to take some of those urgent decisions and priority decisions that governments should have taken since a few years, if not few decades ago. Andrea spoke about the once only principle. Natalia already spoke about the interoperability, not only technical. Those are things that all of us, the UN, the European Commission at different levels, the OECD, and the regional banks have been talking about for at least 10 years. So I think the COVID-19 has demonstrated, like Cristiano also said, that digital and data provide opportunities, but also important challenges for governments in a situation of crisis, but not only, to be able to keep designing policies and services which are valuable, to deliver services, and also to change the operations, what we call within the OECD, the operations within the public sector. So we talk about so much breaking down silos. This is not a novelty. It's just that the COVID-19 has demonstrated that you cannot deliver integrated services unless inside you are cross-cutting, you are horizontal, you move away from some vertical models. And this is a little bit the approach that we have been adopting in the past few months in trying to assess and analyze the practices that governments have put in place to try to understand how ready they were, because I think the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated a digital maturity intended as the capacity to, from one moment to another, be digital, internally in the delivery of services, in the interactions with the users, means for governments. In terms of responses, so to what extent governments were actually ready, meaning they had the skills in place, the policies in place, the infrastructure in place, the laws in place, to be able to design responses that included the use of data and digital, to what extent they have been capable to actually design recovery strategies, which are longer term strategies, to look at the day after tomorrow and after today, and to what extent they have made this part of their long-term public sector reforms. And we will be producing a couple of papers that are coming out in September, one focused on digital, one focused on open data, and the other one focused on open and innovative government, to see also how governments have been connecting the dots as they try to be innovative, as they try to use open government policies, and doing this, putting data and technology at the core of their actions. So that was the first point I wanted to make, because we're all so much about accelerating, but as I really think that the COVID-19 has demonstrated the role of the government is essential. It's important to collaborate with the ecosystem, but the state and the government are the primary providers of core government services, even when they deal with these emergencies. This requires a government that needs to be agile, that needs to be resilient, that needs to be responsive. And I think we all agree that this is a government that needs to be digital in the pure sense of the term. And this builds a little bit also on the work that we've been doing that you, Gianluca, also mentioned in relation to open data. So the policy paper that analyzes the results of the last Our Data Index that we published in 2019 actually demonstrates that, yes, governments have taken important steps to improve accessibility of data, availability of data, and reuse. Many of the formal requirements are now part of national legislations or policies, for instance, the open by default opening up of data, but there are still important efforts that need to be made when it comes to enabling the access and the sharing of the data and the reuse of the data, focusing on the ecosystem, meaning what data do users need. It was really breaking our heart in my team when, in the wake of the explosion of the pandemic in March, we were talking with some open data teams in governments, and they were saying, you know what, there are so many data sets that would be valuable if we could release them now, and our minister is not giving the green light. So in that sense, we were very sad to see that the evidence that we had in the Our Data Index was actually correct, meaning there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to reach out to the ecosystem, which is the one that is needed to reuse the data to produce the value. And in that sense, this is very much connected to other pieces that we worked on, like the data-driven public sector report, Gianluca, that you mentioned, in one aspect in particular, the data governance. Because if you, for all those who looked at that report, for us, data governance means not only the policies, the laws, the institutional setup, but also the measures taken to ensure that data is actually seen as a strategic asset, which means the data architecture is in place, the data infrastructure is in place, but also how all this connects with the adoption of standards and the enforcement of all those standards, so that in a way, we have all the different pieces of the puzzle to be able for government to use data as a key strategic asset, which means using data to come up with services that better respond to the needs of the users, use of data to anticipate needs, but use of data also to assess how they are performing in the delivery of policies and services. And this needs to be linked to the third element, which is the trust. So there's no real gain that can come out of the use of data unless the use of data is trusted by the public. And there are a number of governments, for instance, right now that are looking at the development of ethical frameworks that support the use of data within the public sector, but also link it to the use of AI. Because I think that the other point I wanted to make is that the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated to what extent the silo way of dealing with issues also applies to policymaking. So still many governments have digital government policy and public sector innovation policy and an open government policy and a service delivery policy. And now they're coming up with AI ministries, which in some cases resemble the old ICT ministries, and in other cases are completely disconnected with those dealing with public administration issues and digital government issues. And in this sense, there are, so I anticipate to close, 3 pieces that are coming out also in the near future in September. We are about to release the Digital Government Index that, in our view, and this responds a bit to some of the questions around measurement, in our view, should help a little bit ground on data what we've been talking about for the past few years, which is this shift from e-government to digital government that we included in the OECD recommendation on digital government. And that, as you know, for us is not just a terminological issue, but really requires a paradigm shift, which is important. So the index to be released in early September, which right now it's presented in a pilot version so that we make sure that governments become familiar with it, has 6 indicators, and these 6 indicators correspond to the digital government policy framework that will also be in its full entirety described together with the index in a document that will be released in September as well. And these 6 dimensions, only one has the word digital in it, which is digital by design. The other ones are being data-driven, being able to act as government as a platform, being user-driven, being proactive, and being open by default. So for us, really, the whole idea is that the digital maturity is not much about using technology, but creating the environment that also Andrea, Natalia, and Vincenzo were talking about, which can support a meaningful use of data and of technologies. And last but not least, as you know, within the OECD, we like a lot to support the work with some normative tools. And we are working on a new recommendation on enhanced access and sharing of data, which precisely has the goal also to bring all the stakeholders around the table, because often we talk about open data in governments and open data within the private sector and open data within the scientific and research community. They were different teams, different policies, whereas this recommendation that hopefully will be adopted in 2021 will have the goal to say that if we really want to provide public data as a good public resource, we all need to come together from the different parts of the ecosystem. And I stop here, Gianluca. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Barbara. And actually, I don't know if I can disclose this personal information, but double thanks as I know you were you are on holiday today, so you accepted to be here. Despite that, that shows the commitment that many of us have on this. And also, I want to thank Vincenzo, because he told me he must to leave. Okay, he has to meet the minister, so he prefers a minister to us. So, but also. I know that there is a Zoom fatigue that takes many, and so people suggest not to go over a certain amount of time for the digital meeting. So I don't want to take longer, but maybe we should give the opportunity if someone wants to give make a comment or a question. So maybe we can have a couple of, or otherwise maybe we can have a final. So it seems that nobody is...
There is a hand raised, I think, by Marina Manzoni.
Okay, Marina, we can have a maybe 30-second question or comment.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I'm Marina Manzoni, and I belong to the same unit as Gianluca. Thanks a lot, Gianluca, for your efforts. Rather than a question, it's a kind of comments or an invitation rather than a question. I'm very pleased to have learned that we have moved from efficiency gain to public values and non-monetary gains, which have their cons, like, for example, a digital gap for the elderly, but also their pros, which is a lot, especially in the local ecosystem, as Andrea was saying. And I'm also pleased that we're talking about not more of services rather than technologies, because technologies are just one component of the service, which is a more global, it's a wider concept that involves many more stakeholders and dynamics, and it's more complex than technologies. And I'm also pleased that now we are going from global to local, because as Andrea said, that's where the services are delivered to most of the people. So the local dimension is absolutely high priority in this respect, especially now, because there is where we provide services, and we have to grant accessibility, but inclusiveness rather than accessibility. So inclusiveness of provision of services to everybody. And now we come to what's important to me, which is the user-centric and citizen-centric approach, in the sense that it is at local level where the calibration of the services happens, and it's where the citizens have an active voice, as Gianluca said, an active participation. More and more we are seeing that citizen science, but now, as we like to call it, citizens generating data, is becoming more and more important in the shaping of the services, and also in the shaping of the instruments to deliver the services. And I believe, and I don't know whether you have this in mind for the next research, let's say challenges, I believe that citizens generated data, including citizen science, will bear an important aspect, an important role in the future. I don't know if anybody has something to say about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Marina. So, well, of course, at JRC, we are I mean, but it's not, let's say, my role to mention that, but there is a new work program for next year, as Marina knows, on the talking explicitly of digital transformation of governance and public sector innovation. So many of you are involved, will be involved in this. So I'm very pleased that this work will continue in the future by other colleagues that will take the lead when I'm leaving soon. Now, maybe I can give to each of you maybe a couple of minutes to just respond on this, and maybe a final comment from your side, especially more, say, on the future, not necessarily to the flying cars of 2040 horizon, but maybe in the next couple of years, so when the Digital Europe program and maybe the COVID will be something we will remember, but will be over. So maybe if we can have Barbara, Andrea, and Natalia to conclude this very nice and interesting webinar without going maybe further than 4:40. So maybe we go in a reverse sense. Maybe Barbara, you want to say something, then Andrea and Natalia, just to conclude the remarks.
Yeah, very quickly. I really agree on the relevance of the local governments for two reasons. First of all, because that's the highest proximity to the people. And second, because I really think that change cannot happen unless we really overcome also the distance that sometimes we have from the central administration to the local administration. So I couldn't agree more with the comments that have been made on the importance of taking a look, a very close look, and engage also the local levels of government. Thank you, Gianluca.
Thanks. Andrea, this is for you. It's a served.
Thank you for the question, Marina. Indeed, so at the local level, as you will also recall already in the Tallinn Declaration, the annex already mentions that there must be certain principles that should be recognized and taken into account when delivering services that are around user centricity. So I think that's already been the wish, at least at national level, and now we're just seeing that how it trickles down to all levels of government and what are the kind of means that can make it happen. So certainly that's a very important aspect on the local side, and I wanted to say this earlier, but I didn't have a chance. We're also looking into some indicators for the digital transformation at local level, the so-called local and regional digitization index, the LORDI, that will look at some of these aspects at local level. So hopefully that will also give a better understanding on what's really happening on the ground. As regards citizen science, I think it's absolutely necessary that that data that is very, very useful, and particular, for example, in the case of monitoring environmental indicators or climate change or other issues that happen at local level and have an impact on citizens' lives, I really see a necessity to actually make that part of, if there is such a thing as a data space for local, for cities, that type of data source should also be taken into account, as it can really help improve, for example, decisions made or services collected. So I think we're making all the efforts to engage those stakeholders that are involved in citizen science to be able to bring that data also into the data space. And since you were asking for a last thought, I really like the comment of Barbara, and I think I start to agree with it, that it's perhaps not just acceleration, but it's more about actually bringing out that the role of government for certain key services has now really been very much underlined, and I think this gives a new, perhaps, stimulus for creating a different type of relationship between government and citizens, and trying to underline what are really the core services that government still offers and gives perhaps an alternative to all the kind of scenarios to show that certain solutions and services will eventually come from government. And this makes me think about this idea that triggers my imagination on what this kind of new social contract may be in the future between government and citizens that Hobbes started, and Rousseau and many others in the past. So I'll stop here.
Thanks, Andrea. And well, before to give the last words to Natalia, that somehow is also the owner of this study, as as it has been said at the beginning, this was initiated within the framework of the ELISE action of the ISA Square program. And actually, also want to thank George Lobo, that's been very quiet, but he's been our main, let's say, guardian from Brussels in this case, but also the other colleagues, and you cannot mention all from Connect and from JRC. So, I mean, just to conclude, yeah, ciao, George. And Natalia, if you want to conclude, and then I think we can also leave. And as it was at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, so there will be a possibility to maybe look at it again and think about the future activities that will be, let's say, implemented as a continuation of these and other stream of research and policy action.
Thank you, Gianluca. I would like just to perhaps complete on what just Barbara and Andrea said, because I think also with the COVID crisis, we indeed look at so what could be or what can be the role of governments. We have seen also the balance that is needed between central and local governments. So this is something that I think has, we have to look at the lessons learned from how these crises have been managed from this perspective, because I think there are some advantages, and moving fully to local because we are closer to cities, and we should not reinvent the wheel in each small city here and there, but we have to work together. And I would like to thank you for the approach to this webinar and the whole report, because I think this brings indeed this change in mentality. And here we had the UN, the OECD and Commission and many different representatives. And I think that more and more what we are trying is also trying to put together the information or the solutions that we have seen here and there, and improving them instead of each time having to reinvent the wheel. So I think this is key, and this has started, and we have to continue in this way. So I would like that just to say that indeed we have to continue this collaboration, that this will change not only the way we do this kind of effort and reports, but also the way we deliver the services, because I think that this all is related. So thank you very much, and I think there is a way for the future, very interesting now. Thank you very much.
So thank you, and then I mean I just seek from Francesco, Simon, but I think and Lorena that has been they've been let's say co-organizing this event. So thanks to them and to everyone, and I'm sure we will see again soon, definitely online and hopefully also in person somewhere in the world. So thanks a lot, and see you in the future.